Welcome to this tutorial that was requested for programming Synchronet UIFC apps in JavaScript. What is UIFC? It's a user interface library. It's a text user interface library, or TUI as some people call them. And the source code for this, if you'll find it in the Synchronet source repository under source UIFC, and it's written in C, originally targeting the Borland ConIO library, and later sort of modernized and supporting a lot more screen modes and systems than was traditionally supported by DOS CGA text modes. So although it's advanced quite a bit, it still looks quite a lot like it originally did back in whatever it was, 1990 or 91 when I first created it. But if you're interested in the C source code header files for the API, it's here in this directory. Primary file would be like uifc.h. And it's very much legacy code. I mean, it is still updated and fixed, but there's a lot of warts and tech debt, as you'd expect in something that is over 30 years old. All right, so the request for this tutorial was writing UIFC apps in JavaScript. And some years ago, DOS took the UIFC library and made it available in JSexec. And back in Synchronet version 3.1.4. I guess that's the Pi release in retrospect. And these are the methods or functions available as part of that object, which closely mirror the C API. So if we look in the C API, we'll see there's a init function. Actually, I think it was called UIFC INI. Yeah, that's the init function. And it's kind of different. You'd fill out a structure and a struct and pass it, and the struct was this UIFC API _T, which has all these callbacks in it, and it has a mode. I think you set the mode in that first, and it has the size and the mode. So it's a little bit different, but underlying it ultimately ends up calling this function when you call UIFC init. So this might give you some clue. But it's higher level, so not everything you can do in the C API can be done in JavaScript, so there's probably some more advanced things that you'll see in some Synchronet UIFC applications that you can't necessarily do in JavaScript, but it's always possible you can extend it and make it so you can. But for the primary types of applications like FCFG, you certainly could do all this stuff. Other examples would be like UMonitor. That has some advanced stuff because it has live display of statistics while you still have this other set of options down here in this other window. I think that's a little more advanced. UEdit. So these are native programs written in C, and I'm demoing this on a Chromebook, so you might see a little bit different results on Windows, just a heads up, but this should be very similar for other Linux and Unix-like OSs that we support. The reference is seen over here, so this is where you need to go to find the actual documentation for the UIFC object. So if you go to the top of the Synchronet JavaScript object model reference, and then you have to scroll down to this UIFC object, click on it, and then it'll bring you to first the list of methods supported. These are functions that you can call into from your script, and then properties that you can set or read to determine state information or other configuration stuff. So definitely the first thing you would need to call is UIFC init. It's not optional. It's probably the very minimum. So to demonstrate this, I'll go and I'll create it in my Synchronet exec directory, the script that I'm going to create for this demonstration. You can actually create scripts anywhere else, but by default, JSexec is going to look for them in the exec directory. So it's just easier to demo by creating a script there. And I already have Genie open with a script file called test.js. And this will do our syntax highlighting, so that should make things easier. And I'll go ahead and, well, before I do that, I'll show you some things you can check with JSexec. So first of all, the version we're using, it's obvious here. We're using version 3.20, but you could also do I think a version check there. This version is still in development, not yet released, so it could be slightly different in future versions, including 3.20 release, whatever that is, revision, probably B or C. Let me see here. So JSexec, and then you can check things with the -r, so you can actually invoke some code, and you can say like type of UIFC, and it's an object. And if you just actually print like what is UIFC, it'll say it's an object of class UIFC all caps. This is not a class that you can instantiate on your own. Like you can't create a new UIFC object. It's always there. It's lowercase UIFC, and that's what you'll use. So in our script, like I said, we're going to need to call UIFC.init, and you'll need to pass a title. We'll call this my test app, and then you have some optional mode, and it's a string. For now, we'll just use the default. I think the default's auto, so it automatically selects a screen mode, and we'll just go with that for now. And that's the bare minimum. So if we just do this, save it, and then run it, JSexec test, nothing happened. And I think that's because, yeah, we didn't actually do anything. It's just the initialization, and we didn't create any menus or anything. So now we want a, say, list. That's kind of traditionally what you see in these applications. You'll see a list of options. So we would do like, so list is a method. We have message, we have pop-up messages, we have input for inputting strings, but we'll just go with list since that's kind of the bare minimum that you would normally want to see. So my menu, let's call it, and then you would have an array of options. So we'll just say options. And those are the only required arguments, so we'll go with those first. And then we do need to create a list of options, and we'll make it const, because I don't think we need to change it. And we'll just say it's an array. And I think the array is just an array of strings. So we'll say 1, 2, 3. And then we'll print the return value, or save it anyway. It returns a number, but we'll just say result equals this, and then we'll print result equals result. So that'll tell us what UIFC list returned. Let's try it again. There. Then we get a menu. It says my menu, that's the title, and we're in my test app, and we get the date time up here because you don't have that displayed anywhere else on your computer, do you? Anyway, you have our 1, 2, 3 menus and get this nice light bar interface. And if you choose one of these, or you hit escape, that's the default, or you click this little close icon here, you'll get a corresponding return value. So 1 should return a 0, so result is 0. You can see right there. If we run it again, we do 2, that would be a 1. So you see it's off by 1, right? The first option is 0. 1, 2, etc. If you hit escape, that should return a -1, I believe. Yep, result is -1. So now we can do different things depending on what the list method returns. So typically you'd have this in a loop. You know, you would say maybe while forever, do some stuff, and then you'd say if result is -1, break. Otherwise, we'll do a pop-up. Let's say we'll say UIFC dot message. It's just a pop-up message. We'll actually print the result as well. We don't really need this print statement anymore. It's going to be pretty redundant. All right, so now if we choose one of these options, it should pop up and tell us what number it was. So result was 0, result is 1, result is 2. And then if we hit escape, it just aborts the loop. So -1 is a magic number here. There is a JavaScript load file, and I think it tells you where to reference that here. Let me see, UIFC-defs.js, and it's possible that magic number is defined in there as a constant. I'm not really sure, so we'll look at load UIFC-defs.js. And I don't see, yeah, -1 is a magic number here, so we just kind of have that. There's other possible negative return values depending on special behavior. So you might, you know, if you're not expecting other return values, you might want to just say if less than 0, break. And it's probably going to be the same behavior for your use, but I think there's other cases where you're like copying and pasting items where, you know, -1 is different than other special return values that might be negative. But we can just go ahead and check test that, make sure it still aborts, so. And then the 1, 2, 3 still does what we expect. And then let's say another example would be like you want to input a string. So we could say if result equals 0, so that means you chose the first option. Then we want to capture a string from the user. So we might say UIFC.input, and we look at the reference for input here. We got an optional mode. You have this position, that's what left and top is, this position of the window, a default value for the string, a max length, and a K mode, and they're all optional. So that means we could just do this by default and then print the value that we enter. And granted, it may not be as pretty as you like or exactly the behavior you want, but by default you can just call input with no arguments. So let's try that. We choose the first one. It's telling us the result is 0, and then it's prompting for a string. And notice there's no prompt or anything, it's just an empty input box. This is my string. And then it's going to do the pop-up telling us that's what we entered, this is my string. And you'll notice that you can still see the old input box there on top. And that's because we didn't tell the input function that we needed to save and restore the screen, so it just kind of assumes that it tries to optimize the screen right, so it doesn't always rewrite the screen. So it's kind of two solutions here. One is this first menu. We could tell it it's the original menu, which means anything that's on the screen needs to be erased always. That would fix this particular problem and other problems that might arise from other dialogues that pop up later. So in this first UIFC list, since it's sort of the parent menu, we wanted to pass an option, I'm sorry, not an option, but a mode flag. So before the title, here, you can pass a mode. And the mode, I recall, is WinOrg for original. And by default, of course, it's not going to build with this because it doesn't know the value of WinOrg. It doesn't recognize that. So we have to do the old load trick of UIFC defs.js. And yeah, you could do a require, but in this case, I know there's nothing loaded before this, so there's no point to try to optimize. Watching the World Series here, a little distracted. All right. So now it's the original menu, so if we do this and we input a string, this is my string, and it echoes it back. That's it. Now, see how it cleared it? Because we added that WinOrg flag. So it's good to double check the reference, learn from what all these mode flags do. Original menu, destroy valid screen area. So just basically override it with this background blue color in this example. All right, let me see, what else do we want to show? If you want help, you'd use the show help. Screen for just basically displaying other buffers. Fill the screen with the appropriate background attribute. I don't think you really need to use screen too much. Time display updates the time. You can put different things on the bottom line if you want to override what the default bottom line text is. But I think for the most part, you're going to use just the input and list and maybe a message. Now, pop is basically if you're going to do stuff in the background, you can have it pop up a message and have it automatically disappear. That's what the pop method does. It's a little more advanced, probably don't need to use that. Bail is if you're going to be leaving UIFC mode, basically. It does an automatic uninitialization. You probably don't need to explicitly call bail. If you're going to do other things with your script after UIFC mode, then you probably need to call bail. Those are the basics. If you want to control, like, let's say you want to have nested menus, that's a pretty popular thing. So in this case, we're in this loop here, so we want to continue in this case. And you might, use a switch statement instead of checking with if and continue, but I'll just continue with this pattern. So if result is 1, so we're going to do a submenu in this case. We'll have some new options, or we could have another function that we call, but we'll just make options a variable so we can override it. In this case, we'll say option equals example 1, it's an array, example 2. And then again, we'll call UIFC list. In this case, it's not original, so we don't want to pass that WinOrg flag. Example submenu. Options. And I'll just continue. I don't care what you select. We're just going to pop it down. And what I really want to demonstrate here is how to control the position of the window. So by default, it's going to show up in the exact same position as that first menu. Okay, so we didn't want 1, we wanted this one 2. So see how it's overlapping this menu here? And we probably don't want that, right? We want the first one to still be visible, so we would override the position, and if you look here, list, see this mode parameter that I skipped over because it was optional. If we add that and we say when right, and we say when bottom, that's what those two stand for, sorry, and then you combine them with the OR pipe operator there, bottom, and then we save it. Yeah, that's how we'll now push that sub window down to the lower right. So we say 2. And so now our submenu is down here in the lower right. But you see how we can't really tell which one's active. Right now, your arrow keys, change options over here, not over here, but the menus are the same color. So if you want to fix that, the way you do that is you tell this menu that when you select an option, you want it to stay active. So you say when act. And that means stay active when there's a submenu, or when you choose any kind of option from there. So now if I do 1, see how it grays out now? It turns to the cyan color. That's because we added that when act flag. Okay, and I do the same here with the second submenu, so now we have a submenu. The main purpose, I think, the context is so if you have a whole bunch of submenus and you're saving and restoring the screen, it knows exactly where to save and store properly. Aha, the context object has the following properties right there: cur, bar, top, left, and width. All right, cur is the current selection, so whatever is highlighted, and that's a 0 index, so it starts with 0. Bar is the position of the light bar, which, if you don't have very many options, then bar and cur are the same thing, because the bar, is at offset 0, and the first option is at offset 0. However, if the window scrolls, because you have more options than you have screen to display, then bar would be a lower number than cur. So cur is the actual option index, and bar is the index into the, where the light bar is actually displayed. Top is the 0-based offset into the window. So from the top, basically how many lines to skip before displaying the list. Left is the margin on the left, and width is the width of the window. New UIFC list CTX. And then say ctx.width equals 40, and then we'll pass that context. There we go. Now we got a wide menu. This is 40 characters across, 40 cells. I'm going to go into a little more detail on the input method, since it has a lot of options here. Of particular interest is the mode. Has a lot of different mode flags available. So the default mode will be just 0 or none. And we can see here we've got, actually not that many. Let me see, what K. So the other K flags are going to come from sbbsdefs.js. So these other K flags that you see defined in UIFC defs, these are specific to UIFC, whereas the other K flags are common between Synchronet itself and UIFC. So I'll go ahead and open SBBS defs just so we can get those other K flags here. And we'll also need to include sbbsdefs.js if we want those K flags, because yeah, it's not included here. K for keyboard input. There we go. Like I said, default is 0, K none. Then you've got modes that convert dull to upper and upper lower, and only allow numeric input or other things. You also have option here for a prompt. Let me see, where is the prompt? Number top, string default, excellent number K mode. Interestingly, I don't see the prompt text here. That could be a bug in the documentation. Let's see if we just pass a string. Let's see if that's a prompt. Go 1. Yeah. So the documentation looks wrong here. I'll update that. But yeah, if you just pass a single string, then that's your prompt text. Yeah, left, number, top, default. So if you pass a second string, then that'll be your default value for that string. So then we would just try this. So now it should be like the default value of the string that is put in there. And you'd have to edit if you want to change, or just enter to accept it. So yeah, see now it doesn't show a default value, and that's because we didn't pass the kEdit flag. So if you want to edit an existing string, then you do have to pass a mode, and we would say kEdit. So we need require SBBSDefs kEdit. That means it'll load SBBSDefs.js if kEdit's not already defined. And then we still don't have the text in there. If you want to edit an existing string, as you saw there, if I hit escape, it returns undefined. So that's good to know. But how come it's not editing the existing string that we pass in? Well, okay. So kmode actually follows the strings. So this kEdit actually needs to go afterwards. So the first mode would be like these win flags for the UIFC mode. So if you wanted to put it, in the middle of the screen or something, then this would be like win mid. I actually think that's kind of the default. Anyway, but win mid, not kmid. Win for window. Written before Windows. And then kEdit, because we want the kmode to follow the string. Still don't see a default value here. We've got a really long input buffer. The default was 40. So if we wanted to limit that, the max len comes before there. So you could say, so maybe that's why we don't have the max len. So if we put 20 for the maximum length before the kmode flag, there we go. Now we have the default value, we have a sensible maximum length, and we're in the middle of the screen because we used that win mid flag for the first argument, the mode argument, right here. So like I said, I'll update the documentation because I can see here the prompt is missing. But if you wanted to specify the left offset or the top offset, you could include those numbers after the mode flag or flags. So you could say if you wanted none, you could say specify no special flags here, 0, then you could say 5, 5, for example. And then it should be 5 from the top and 5 from the left. And there it is. So if you count those cells, it'd be 5 from the top, 5 from the left. And again, I hit escape, so you can see that's why it says stir is undefined. But if I give it a value, new string value, then it'll say stir equals stir new string value. So then you're writing a configuration program, you'd save that to a file or something. And you could prompt for save changes or not, and all that fancy business. All right, I think that's probably enough to get you started writing your own UIFC apps. Like I said, there's other methods here, show help and the screen and show buff, but they're pretty advanced. They're probably for showing other just like blocks of text on the screen. And if you need help, hit me up on IRC or the Synchronet support forums, or I can make another video if you need one. But I think this is a good head start on writing UIFC apps in JavaScript for Synchronet. Till next time.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet's big. Synchronet.
Synchronet, the BBS program that I use.
Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet. Synchronet. Synchronet.
Synchronet.
Synchronet, Synchronet, and Synchronet.